This reflects my personal tips. It's not anything official from AGU, and you need to have your own style, but this is what has worked for me in writing a number of successful nomination letters over the years, and also having served on some committees of various sorts. Letters that are written kind of like this tend to be the ones that I find are effective with me and other reviewers. So next slide. So I'm going to go over a few different areas, so content of the letter and structure and stuff like that. So the first thing is, and some of this may seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how many letters I've seen that don't do these kind of things. So it's worth just laying it out there. So first of all, the content of the letter. Specify the exceptional qualities or accomplishments, it's usually accomplishments really what you want to focus on, of the nominee. These AGU honors are not general honors. You're not writing a general letter of recommendation. You're writing something specific to a set of criteria. Each honor has a set of criteria that are being evaluated by a committee, and so you want to be writing showing how the person is exceptional and satisfying those criteria. And you have to realize, some people have written tenure letters and things like that, promotion letters, where the focus tends to be, did this person meet bar? This is not like that. This is a highly competitive situation. Ideally, there are multiple nominees for every that are really good, that meet whatever bar you might have. You're trying to make the case that your nominee is exceptional. Right? No one gets one of these honors for just being good enough. And that includes fellow, which sometimes people see that way. But those are really competitive, go through multiple committees. You need to make the case that your nominee is really an exceptional candidate for that particular honor. And many letters don't do that. And then they get the feedback that a letter writer will get is that your letter was not fully persuasive, or something like that. So a good way to be persuasive is to stress what's exceptional. Second is clearly articulate the relevance to the award criteria. Again, it's very common to see letters that talk effusively about how exceptional the person is, but don't really make clear how that nominee aligns, what makes them exceptional aligns with what that award is all about. The letter should really document that. And when I write a letter, and the ones that are most persuasive to me when I read them, make clear how the nominee really exemplifies the criteria, right? That like, this is the perfect person for this award because look how well they meet these specific criteria. So write the letter directly and explicitly to the criteria. And this is really important. Do not assume, do not assume that the reviewers will understand the relevance of the candidate to the award. Just because it's obvious to you. Lead them right to it in words explicitly so that they cannot miss it. I'm going to come back to this again and again, that reviews are all busy, number one, so they don't have the brain power to give to thinking through the nomination. And even more important, reviewers are very often not in the subfield or even in the same discipline, right, as your nominee. And so what seems obvious to you about relevance will not necessarily seem obvious to them. So be really clear, specific, and in an explicit way in the letter of how the exceptional traits, exceptional accomplishments of the nominee align with the award criteria. Third thing in terms of content that I find really important is more, especially when you're nominating somebody for one of the AGU, the highest honors, right? These are very senior and accomplished people. Highly productive, and I know I've been in a position where it's like I don't even know where to begin because there's so much I could write about, and it's very tempting then to try to write a really comprehensive letter. Don't do that because what you'll end up writing is a very dense letter that is very hard to read. Again, reviewers are busy and they're not always experts, so they can't really tell what's important and what isn't. So what's far better, I've focused on one or two really clearly explained examples of why that candidate is a really great candidate for that award, and really explain that well to somebody who is a non-expert. So instead of trying to pack everything in, really have that kind of focus. You can of course say that, look, you can literally say, this person is so exceptional in this field, I don't even know where to begin, but here is a particular example, right? So, you can have your cake and eat it too. You don't have to pretend that there's only one thing that they've done, but focus on one thing or two things or maybe three things, whatever it is, to be focused and kind of punchy about it. without neglecting all the other things they've done. But don't fall into the temptation of trying to be comprehensive. Certainly, the ones that I've had the most trouble getting through, not letters, is when I've been to try to pack too much into a letter. Also, when you're constructing a nomination package, when you're working on this with a group of other people, if you can be coordinated enough, and this doesn't always happen. In fact, I would say more often than not, it doesn't happen. But if you can be this coordinated, you can have different letters speak to different dimensions of the award. And that allows each letter to have some focus. And in total, the package then covers it all. And the lead nominating letter can kind of summarize all of it, but have each of the supporting letters be a little more focused. That can be a very effective way of packaging this all together. Next slide. So then the structure of the letter. So this is how I do it. Everybody has their own style, but I find this to be effective, and I find it easy to read when I see a letter that's kind of like this. I kind of seeing a bunch of letters. So first of all, I always open with a summary paragraph. It's kind of like an abstract in a way. Again, reviewers are busy. They need help understanding the case right away as soon as they start reading the letter. They really benefit from a roadmap to the nomination so that they can kind of understand what they're going to see when they look at the rest of the package, because the nominating letter is probably the first thing they see. So certainly in a nominating letter especially, but even in a supporting letter, I'll often do this of giving this kind of summary. And so here's a example, right? Don't start writing a whole bunch of letters that copy this word for word, or everybody will know you use webinar. But it is my great pleasure to express my enthusiastic support, convey enthusiasm one way or another for Professor X for the Y medal. I do so because X is, and summarize what's exceptional about the accomplishments of that person. And then literally, I usually say, in these ways, some kind of language like this, in these ways, this person, Professor X, exemplifies the criteria of the medal, and I summarize how so at a high level. Right. So in one paragraph, usually no more than 5 sentences, I kind of get across what the case is about, and then I say, okay, so now I will explain in detail later, later in the body of the letter. So just by reading that one paragraph, the reviewer has a sense of what this case is all about and why this person is exceptional, and you conveyed some of your enthusiasm. What I usually do in a second paragraph is to state my relationship to the nominee. That's partly because people may always wonder about conflicts of interest. Of course, a disqualifying conflict of interest you should have already taken care of, but there are all sorts of conflicts that are not disqualifying, but that need to be mentioned. And it's good to mention them so that people don't wonder. But what I also find is it allows you to add a kind of a personal touch that builds credibility. Whether that's through familiarity, right? I've known Professor X was going to change the world since I first met them when we were graduate students together, right? So you've established this kind of warm personal touch, right? And that you've always thought this person was great. And you've established also how you know the person. But it can also be very positive if it's the opposite, right? I've never met this person before, I've never worked with them in my life, but they've transformed my science, right? That's also a very positive thing to clear your relationship and creates this kind of personal connection or personal understanding and a kind of a warmth, even when you're at distance. You've created this kind of emotional warmth in the letter that helps to convey the power of your enthusiasm for the nominee. So I usually do that in a second paragraph. Again, I've seen it done elsewhere. I've seen people not do it at all and are very successful, but I find this is a pretty effective thing to do. And then in the subsequent paragraphs, this is where you really make the case, and you should do it really clearly and specifically. Letters that are just generally persuasive, I find it's a good idea usually to structure the letter around the criteria for the honor, right? So if there are like 3 or 4 things that honor is all about, I may literally have the subsequent body of the letter have paragraphs that are each about one of those criteria. I might even sometimes, if I think it's going to work, like have subheadings, like this paragraph is going to be about this criteria, and now I'm going to talk about that. Just really walk the reviewers through how the nominee aligns with the criteria. So I said that before that you want to do that. So here's structurally how you do that, right? You make it really clear and explicit in the structure of the letter. And this is a good place also where you can coordinate with supporting letters. If this is a nominating letter and the supporting letters are speaking to different parts of it, you can reference that in the nominating letter. You can say, as so-and-so wrote, in their letter in detail, this person X, Y, and Z, and summarize it in the nominating letter. And don't forget the citation. I think all AGU awards require that you provide a citation of words. It's good to put that either at the beginning or at the end of the nominating letter, so it doesn't get lost. I usually tend to put it at the beginning, right after that initial summary paragraph. I'll say, therefore, I nominate this person for the following awards. Here's the citation. And those citations, what they're used for is they're actually used when the announcement is made about the award. They're publicized, right? And so you can look at past honoree citations for the award that you're looking at for examples of citations. And I would just, follow the format that you see there in those prior examples. And then finally, next slide. Whenever it shows up.
Oh, it should be up.
Oh, there we go. Style of the letter. So this is really personal. This is really, again, this is just how I do this. Again, I find this effective. So first of all, I've said this before, write for non-experts, especially AGU. It's such a broad organization. A space weather person is not going to understand geomicrobiology necessarily, right? And especially for fellows, when a fellow nomination gets up to the union committee, that's what you're really dealing with, right? Is that level of remove, right? And so don't assume expertise. Write in simple language. Avoid jargon as much as possible. Explain the significance of the nominee's contributions in a language and wording that the non-expert can understand. That's, I think a lot of letters go wrong there, especially fellow nominations. I think it's not off. I think that the union committee may have a hard time really understanding what's so important about what this person did. You may get everything else right in terms of the tone of the letter and stuff like that, but they just can't quite figure it out because it's explained in too complicated a way. And that doesn't necessarily kill a nomination, but it certainly doesn't help. So explaining the significance in ways that a non-expert can understand is really helpful. Use citation information wisely. As Jen mentioned, there's a movement to de-emphasize the H-index, which I think is a good thing because it's prone to all biases. So don't, you can mention it, but probably best not to even bother mentioning the H-index, of the candidate. But do discuss specific papers of note when they're relevant to the case, right? So if somebody wrote a paper that's been cited 5,000 times and has transformed the field, talk about that paper. Mention that it's been cited 5,000 times. Yes, there's bias in how that happens too, but obviously that's a large reason that you're nominating the person, and you can write about it with more color and dimensionality than an H-index. And a paper that is really important but hasn't been cited that much, and maybe that's part of why you're nominating the person, especially in case of a junior person for an award, McElwain Award or something like that. Or even somebody who is, for a fellow who's very accomplished, but maybe what you think is their biggest contribution is actually something that is not so widely recognized. Say that, talk about that. So use citation information in a wise kind of way to build the case. Jen knows because she was a student in my group. I try to drill it in. Write with topic sentences. Don't assume that reviewers are going to read every word that you wrote, every precious, carefully crafted word in the middle of every paragraph. They probably aren't going to. Many of them won't anyway. But they will read, hopefully, at least the first sentence of every paragraph. So make that first sentence count. Have the first sentence be a clear statement where the rest of the body of the paragraph develops that. That helps the busy reviewer skim the letter and get a sense of what's going on here, of what's important. And if it's really well done, it will entice them to read more of the detail. Because they're intrigued by the opening sentence. So that's, I think, a really useful tip of how to write powerfully in general, but especially in these letters, I think it's really important. You don't want a wall of text. You want paragraphs that are not too long and where the beginning of each one is really, really clear and grabs the reader's interest. And then finally, this of course is really important, last but definitely not least, guard against bias. Especially, gender bias. We know very well that there's all sorts of gendered language. I can't tell you how many times I've read letters for people who I know are outstanding. Especially women candidates, but the letters just don't sing the way they should. And there's definitely a bias there. I've definitely seen letters for male candidates, so I didn't think were all that great, but wow, that's a strong letter, right? I don't know why that happened, but it happens. And what we need to be doing as nominators, as letter writers, is to be on guard for that, and pay close attention. One thing you can do that's pretty easy is there are these online bias checkers. I put a link to one of them here that I find kind of useful. You know, you can basically cut and paste your text, and it'll tell you, it'll give you some indication of to what extent your user is biased. Other little tips, like I've gone over to deliberately not using first names. I refer to, you know, Dr. Smith, Professor Smith, whatever, rather than first name, to try to minimize this kind of unconscious bias. You know, if I'm talking about Jen, it's different than I'm talking about Professor Glass. There's a different air and atmosphere around that. And again, I think that there are certain gender assumptions that flow into that. By doing that, going to that kind of a more uniform formality, it helps combat that. That's again been what I've been looking at my own reactions to letters, and so I've tried to really be conscious about doing that when I write letters. So that's what I've got. Happy to take questions, as is Jen, I'm sure.
Great, thank you, Dr. Anvar. And
Professor Glass. Funny how we kind of rediscovered some of the formalities of you know, of our ancestors, right? For different reasons, but they have value.
They do, indeed. Great, thank you, and round of applause. Thank you. That was great.
You too.
So, Hannah, do we have questions already? Otherwise, we can throw in some to start off with.
We do.
Okay.
I think this may be to the first portion of the presentation, so maybe what you presented on, Jen. So it sounds like the person being nominated should be an accomplice to a nomination, but what about the element of surprise? How important is it that you include the person being nominated in the preparation process?
Okay, great question. Yes, that is completely personal preference, and it just depends on the situation. So in some cases, it's possible someone might be confident enough, this usually doesn't happen, but to see in themselves like, hey, I deserve an award. I'm gonna go find my own nominator and ask them, right? Probably, you know, so in that case, obviously that they should be very much providing some content, probably, if they're gonna go out and ask people themselves. Usually it's more like there's a group of people, their peers or colleagues or whatever canvassing committee that identifies somebody, and you're absolutely right. It could be a surprise, and I've seen that a few times successfully, and it's lovely. The only thing is it may be a little more work for that nominator, and usually, as you can see, there's a group of people working together, right? So often you're emailing all together on these emails. That's how you're seeing each other's letters and things. So that's okay. Sometimes maybe one won't want to, you know, somebody will just want to email the nominator with their letter, but I'm rambling. So moral story is you can do it however you want. And if you prefer, it's really up to the nominator. The nominator is usually really the person, there's kind of a lead on it, right? Like a go-to person. And that person, sometimes they really don't, you know, that they really feel strongly. They want it to be a surprise. So they tell the other people, hey, you know, let's try this for this person and let's get this together and let's just all work on it together. And we're not even going to tell them. And that's great. That's like the best of all worlds, right? For the nominee, they just suddenly get an award. But I'd say more often they have some idea that they're being nominated or they're asked for some materials, just because it can be pretty overwhelming to put this all together without any input from the nominee, in my opinion. But I know a lot of people do it, and that's great. So it's just personal preference.
But I'll say, spirit, you know, if you're thinking of nominating somebody, you know, should you approach them about them to help you with the package? If you want their help, you should go and ask them for help, because obviously it makes things a lot easier. There is an older school way of thinking about it, that it's somehow taboo to tell the nominee that they're being nominated, right? And I think that's okay. That's what you want to do. That's fine. But if you want to reach out to the nominee to discuss the nomination with them, I think that's great, frankly, and to be encouraged.
Yeah.
And it's not a taboo. If you think it's a taboo, it's not.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. There's a comment on including the nominee too much. I've seen that backfire on collaborations and friendships, so.
Okay, including the nominee too much. I've seen that backfire. Wow, I guess I guess it's hard
I can imagine it happening. Again, so that's why it's personal, right? It's up to the nominator to decide how they want to handle it.
Yeah, just totally, it might work different in different fields. This is just how we've done it in the past where, you know, Ariel and I, let's just say, have worked on some packages together for someone else we just think deserves it, you know, someone outside of our lab group, but just we think deserves it. And so you can imagine a few different people get together and a bunch of emails fly around, and I'm working on formatting their bibliography and etc. So usually that group does it without like CCing the nominee, right? So they're not seeing everything. But yeah, I could imagine maybe that, unfortunately, that things go. I don't know. I'll have to talk more about talk more about that offline. But thanks for your perspective. Do we have more?
It can be, in practice, it can be hard to get the information for the CV without consulting with the nominee. I've certainly done it sometimes where I've gone to a department chair and gotten the information I needed, where I really wanted to surprise somebody. But usually, it's most efficient to reach out directly to the nominee.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you have a good reason that you don't want them to know, you shouldn't feel any compunction about reaching out to them.
All right, great, thank you. So we have another question. Do all of the awards require the same application materials?
So I don't know if Latoya and Rose are still on. They can comment probably best on that. But my very short answer is generally, I would say probably, I don't know what percent, but the vast majority require those two-page CV, two-page bibliography, nominating letter, and then gosh, is it 2 or 3 supporting letters, Ariel? 3?
I remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure the format has been standardized the way Jen just said. The difference between different awards is the different criteria, and hence the content of the letters needs to be different. And you might organize the bibliography a little differently depending on the nature of the award, because you may want to highlight different things in the bibliography. Mm-hmm. But Rose is here, so she can tell us what's really true.
It's true what you've said. No, generally, I think that's right. I would encourage folks, in case there's some, you know, idiosyncrasy, so to speak, from award to award in terms of requirements. Like I said, there's information there's a web page for each award, but you can always get in touch with the honors team that can kind of show you where to find that.
So it's one. There's always one nominating letter, right, with a citation in it, and then there's 3 usually, but sometimes only 1 or 2, but usually I think 3 supporting letters. So that might have been not clear to people, but that is essential really early on to identify your nominator, or you can have 2, or sometimes you can even have more than 2, right, or just 2 nominators.
I think you can have a nomination letter be co-signed by 2 people. I think that's.
Mm-hmm. That's the letter, and that's a lot of what Ariel was talking about was that letter, right? That's the kind of probably the most important letter, right? But then you got to have 3 supporting letters. So this is why it takes so long to get these things together. Well, you know, at least a month or so you need advance, because you got to find 4 people at least who are going to be in on this. So that can take a little bit of doing, but generally if you go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's worth saying, you know, so because it's a lot of work to organize a team of people and get the body material together, this is why sometimes you'll see, I think in practice, you know, some people get multiple awards over a short period of time, because once that group of people is together and that package of material is together, it becomes a relatively low bar to move to other awards as well. So that's a phenomenon that you see happening. It also means, you know, that you know, when you start a push for somebody for an award, or if you yourself are pushed for an award, there is that kind of bandwagon that sometimes kind of happens. So just something else to keep in mind as you navigate these things.
Yeah, that's great.
Great,
It's a lot of
thank
effort
you.
to get the ball rolling, get the team together.
And
Wonderful.
definitely reapply when you don't, if you don't get it the first time, right? That often, you know, very often is the case. And sometimes you have to try and try and try and try, but
Jen and I are working on nominating somebody we've been at for quite a while for a particular award that we think they're quite worthy, and we won't give up.
All right, so then we have another question about the importance of AGU service. So how important is AGU service in nominations?
I'll let Ariel or Rosa or Latoya, if she's still there, talk about that, because I haven't been on a selection committee yet.
Yeah, I think that's evolved. Again, Rosa may have a better insight than I do. My sense is it can only help. The nature of the award will determine whether it's like really critical or not. But it can only be a plus.
There are some service awards, right? Also,
right. And there's a necessity.
Yeah, I mean, it can't hurt, right? So,
Yeah, this is Latoya. Can you guys hear me?
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So yes, I wanted to say it's one of those things that it's like you have your ice cream sundae. It's the cherry on the top, right? Like it's that little extra thing. But I do want to say, by no means is everyone who's an honoree holding some office or some position as a volunteer leader within AGU.
Right. And conversely, being a volunteer leader is not a ticket to awards either.
Right.
We've certainly seen that as well.
Right.
Great, thank you. So that is all I'm seeing in terms of questions in the chat. I don't know if there are any others that folks are working on crafting or not, but that is what I'm seeing right now.
Okay. Well, did anyone else have any questions or last words of wisdom from our panelists?
One more follow-up. Could you speak a little bit more about the canvassing committee, sort of what their role is?
Yeah,
I can speak to that a little bit.
Ariel? Yeah.
I can speak to it a little bit. I mean, this webinar is being organized primarily by Biogeosciences, right? So,
Yes.
so I've chaired the Biogeosciences canvassing committee. We got it kind of reignited when I was president. And so the role of that committee is to sort of generate nominations for awards that you know, are relevant to the section, right? So in particular, every section has its own internal awards. So you want to make sure that there's a robust group of nominees. So that's one of the things the canvassing committee does. And the other is it looks for each section is in charge of nominating fellows, or reviewing fellows nominations in that section and then forwarding them on to the union fellows selection committee. And so most sections, I think, certainly Biogeosciences, take seriously trying to make sure that there's a good group of nominations being generated from the section of fellows, and a diverse. I mean, especially as the more we focus on diversity, finding ways to beat the bushes to get good packages out, by which means not just getting the names of people and finding nominators to nominate them, but then, and Jen and I have been involved in this, you know, working with those nominators to make sure that the packages are really strong. Looking at things even like you know, the quality of the letters. I mean, we've been involved when we were working together on the canvassing committee of actually kind of micromanaging some packages a little bit. You know, we looked at them and said, you know, this letter is, when the nominator was willing to do this, right, and some really were, you know, they showed us drafts of their letter and we critique and advise on how the letter and other things in the package might be improved. So that's kind of what the canvassing committee is supposed to do, at least in Biogeosciences has done over the years. So generate high quality, diverse nominations, work with nominators to help make the packages as strong as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if all sections do that.
Yeah, I remember I would just download, lists of every single member in the section, and then go through and, see who, who, beat the bushes, and see who really was needing some recognition.
Yeah, biology sciences, especially because it's kind of a young section. There's, a lot of people who, hadn't gotten recognition when they were younger because this section didn't exist, right? And so it's like, oh, how is this person not an AGU fellow? Okay, who might be willing to nominate that person? Okay, let's contact them and go from there.
Yeah.
Jen, we have another question that's come in. Does organizing sessions count as service?
Yes, absolutely. Yep, I think that was on MICD session chair of, and then put the session title and the AGU fall meeting, whatever year or whatever meeting it was, but especially for the AGU meetings.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we have another question.
Oh, I had a question
sorry.
as well. That's okay. I just wanted to ask Ariel and Jen, could you speak about identifying a main letter writer or lead letter writer and how that gets decided and who makes a strong candidate?
Ariel, do you want to take that one?
I wish there was a science to it. Part of it, of course, is the person has to be willing to do it. So, if you're the canvassing committee, on the canvassing committee, you may look around and try to see who might, who's a non-conflicted person who knows that field, who knows that person, sometimes it's a former student, and you approach them and see if they're willing to do it. That's certainly one path. If you're interested in nominating somebody, you're wondering, are you qualified to be a nominator? Rosa has seen much more than I have. I've seen also, I've seen nominations led by junior people. That's fine. A junior nominator, but where there's a really strong group of supporting letters, that can work. I'd be curious to know what Jen and Rosa think. I do tend to look for the most senior and persuasive person to be not, but if they aren't going to write a good letter, better a good letter from a more early career junior person than a poorly written letter from somebody who is in the National Academy or something like that, right? Because in the end, people are going to read the letter.
Yeah, Rosa, do you have more comments, or Latoya?
Rose, we can't hear you.
Sorry, there we go. No, I think, Ariel, what you're saying is right. It's kind of whoever kind of has a good beat on being able to write a persuasive letter, kind of get the information from the rest of the group who are kind of contributing, so it doesn't have to be any particular profile of person necessarily.
But you can find the list of all the fellows online and all previous awardees, and I do honestly tend to kind of look those over sometimes to see, who can I ask for letters? Just because once I think we would generally agree, once you've been awarded something, you're more likely to be asked to, give back and recommend other people for that thing. And I think everybody probably expects that. So you can look through the previous awardees and if they're willing, just be sure, honestly, do it earlier, because people have a harder time saying no if it's early, right? And also they often stack up the invitations. The invitations stack up. So people, if you're a month out, people will say, I'm sorry, my dance card's all full for this year, So you got to do it early. This is a good time to start. Let's do it in the spring.
Great,
yeah, we'll say a lot of the packages that come in everyone's last minute, right? So, yeah. and it's it causes a backlog in a lot of ways on your end and our end. So early and often, well, not often, but early is better.
Right. Well, it's 4 o'clock. Is there any other burning questions, or shall we close up for today?
So we had one final one come in. Oh, I'm sorry, Jen.
Oh, we had one more. Okay, if we can stay on another minute or two, I'm going to have to jump off pretty soon, but we can. I want to
Yep,
make sure
it
that we go to these
should be
offices.
a quick one. So the question is there a limit on the number of fellows nominations that a section can put forward to the final selection committee? And the answer is yes. So it is 2% of a section's primary membership that they are able to forward. So it does, vary a bit from year to year, depending on the number of primary members within that section in the preceding year that they're able to forward up to the final selection committee.
Thank you, Hannah. That question was tailor-made for you.
So that's it, Jen. You guys can take over.
Thank you, Hannah, for getting this all organized. Thank you so much. Should we have, yes, round of applause. So in the last couple of seconds, should we have, do Maya and Emily want to go over the last details of these?
Yeah, so thank you to all of our presenters and for all of those who were able to attend. We're going to follow up this webinar with a series of office hours. I've outlined a couple of the dates here. We'll also have Kim Novick and another professor will be speaking to some of these office hours, and so we'll send out more information, but basically people can come, they can ask questions about their application, packets, talk to all of our presenters more one-on-one and work with each other on getting together some really great nomination packets. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. And then if you want to get involved with, this was put on by the Biogeosciences DEI committee. So if you're interested in getting involved, we have meetings the first Tuesday of every month, and we support and lead projects like this. And you can work to build a network of friends and colleagues. And if you have any further questions, you can contact Emily or I at this email address. So thank you, everyone.